behalf of the Organization of American States, the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, and the Cybersecurity Program of the OASICTE, we would like to welcome you to this closing session of the 5th Cybersecurity Symposium, which we are now conducting in a virtual way. We're very excited to have your presence this morning, which is very important event. And well, before we begin, we would like to thank our partners and our donors who have really made this event possible, especially the governments of the United States and Canada. This closing session will be conducted in English with simultaneous translation into Spanish, Portuguese, and French. In order to access the interpretation, please click on the interpretation icon as shown in the screen. It looks like a globe, and select the language of your choice. And well, please join me also in thanking our amazing interpreters that really make this possible as well. So just a reminder, interpretation is available. And well, as you know, just a disclaimer that the opinions expressed in this presentation and throughout today's session do not necessarily reflect the views of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States or the governments of its member states. As you know, this 5th edition of the Cybersecurity Symposium takes place under the framework of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And well, under the spirit, with the spirit, we would also invite you to follow our Twitter, OEA_cyber, so that you can be informed about all the events that we'll be conducting during this Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Today, our session begins with a panel on cybersecurity for financial industries amidst COVID-19, as well as closing remarks by Alison August-Trepo, Executive Secretary of CICTE. The panel will also include a Q&A session at the end, in which you, all the participants, will be able to ask questions to the panelists. Just, we would like to remind you to please only include the questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat, as questions in the chat will not be considered. Just a reminder for everyone who's joining in this couple of minutes, there is interpretation available to Spanish, Portuguese, and French. Well, before we start with our panel, let me present our moderator, Dr. Tim Maurer. Dr. Tim Maurer is co-director of the Cyber Policy Initiative and a senior fellow in Carnegie's Technology and International Affairs program. He works on the geopolitical implications of the internet and cybersecurity, with a focus on the global financial system, influence operations, and other areas of importance as actors exploit the gray space between war and peace. In 2018, Cambridge University Press published his Cyber Mercenaries, The State, Hackers, and Power, a comprehensive analysis explaining proxy relationships between states and hackers. As part of his policy engagement, he regularly engages with governments and industry and participates in US Track 1.5 dialogue. He served as a member of the Freedom Online Coalition's Working Group, an Internet Free and Secure, the Research Advisory Network of the Global Commission on Internet Governance, and co-chaired the advisory board of the Global Conference on Cyberspace. Prior to joining Carnegie, Dr. Tim Maurer was the director of the Global Cybersecurity Norms and Resilience Project at New America and head of research of New America's Cybersecurity Initiative. Tim, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and good morning, everybody. I've been seeing your messages in the chat, and it looks kind of like my future travel list and what I look forward to doing once this pandemic is hopefully over. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you remotely, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel with a distinguished set of experts that I'm going to introduce in a second. As Mariana just explained, and for the translators, I'm aware that I speak fast, so I will remind myself to speak slowly so you will have a chance to translate in time. We will first have a discussion among the panelists, and then we will make sure that we reserve time for any questions and comments from the audience. So with that, I'm now delighted to introduce the panelists, starting with Alberto Hernandez. Alberto is the Chief Information Security Officer of Citibanamex and previously served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute. Prior to becoming the CEO of INCIBE, he was also its chief operating officer and had joined the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute from serving as the head of the cyber defense area of the ISD-EFE, the Engineering Systems for Defense of Spain, where he helped design and implement the Spanish Cyber Defense Command. He serves as an international expert to the Organization of American States in missions for the development of national cybersecurity strategies in several Latin American countries. And as you know, one of the sessions earlier this week focused specifically on how to develop national cybersecurity strategies, which is a topic that many governments still struggle with. And once you have a strategy, it's already at a point where it often needs to be updated. Alberto has a Bachelor of Science in Telecommunications Engineering from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, and he's a certified security director by the Spanish Ministry of the Interior. Our second speaker is Laura Dinier. Laura is the Chief Information Security Officer at S&P Global, responsible for establishing and driving the enterprise information security vision and program at the company. She also serves on the board of directors of FS-ISAC and is the co-chair with the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on cybersecurity. She was previously the first named Chief Information Security Officer at PR Newswire, and Laura has been a champion for diversity and inclusion in tech and cybersecurity. She serves on the S&P Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, where she's revamping the employee resource groups, and she works with external organizations like Girls Who Code to build in diverse talent pipelines in technology organizations, a topic that I know many organizations still struggle with, of making sure that there are actually diverse teams within those organizations. So it's great to have those initiatives and for Laura to have you here with this event. And then the third speaker is Jamil Farchi. Jamil is the Chief Information Security Officer at Equifax, responsible for ensuring the security of the company's digital assets, as well as transforming the Equifax cybersecurity program into a world-class capability. He previously served as the Chief Information Security Officer of the Home Depot. You will detect a pattern here, where he built the company's information security program into an industry leader following one of the largest cyber breaches in history. Before that, he also served as the first Global Chief Information Security Officer of Time Warner. He was Vice President of Global Information Security for Visa, Deputy Chief Information Assurance Officer for NASA, and the CISO of the Los Alamos National Laboratory. We had responsibility for defending some of the most sensitive national security nuclear weapon assets in the United States. So it's a pleasure to have the three of you on this panel today. Speaking of the lab, Jamil, I actually just did a road trip over the summer and passed by the lab somewhere in the middle of nowhere. So great to make that connection. And I thought I'd kick us off first by a question to all of you, but starting with you, Laura, sure. Which is the COVID-19 pandemic has changed everything as we know. People are now working from home. They're using their personal and work devices running on the same home network mostly. And few companies have heard of platforms like Zoom that are now household names. How has COVID-19 affected how you protect your company and how S&P is thinking about how it protects itself against cyber threats?
Great, thanks for the question and thanks for moderating, Tim. This is great. I really appreciate the time and for everybody's time today in hearing us talk about these things. They're very, very important. As far as protecting the company in the time of COVID-19, some of the things that we've noticed is more attacks, obviously, more people taking advantage of the fact that we're working in a different environment. And so what we did as a company is we really just thought about partnering with other technologists, making sure we're bolstering our remote working capabilities, making sure we're thinking about how people are working from home from a persona perspective, and then of course making sure everybody has more training than they already had before. It is Cyber Awareness Month, so they have gotten a lot of training this month, but when the pandemic started, we made sure we tailored the training to thinking about how they're working from their home environments.
Alberto, Jamil, how has COVID-19 impacted how you protect your respective companies?
Okay, thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here on time to take part of this panel. First of all, I hope you and your families are doing well. And due to most of the audience speaking Spanish, let me move to talking in Spanish. Buenos días a todos. Un placer estar aquí. Muchas gracias a por invitarme a este panel. Espero que sus familias y ustedes estén muy bien y les mando un caluroso saludo desde Ciudad de México. Bueno, evidentemente la situación de COVID-19 nos ha supuesto un reto muy importante desde el punto de vista de seguridad a todas las organizaciones, ¿no? En nuestro caso, básicamente este reto ha consistido en dos aspectos. El primero, un reto de capacidad, es decir, nosotros con la llegada de Bring Your Own Device y el uso de dispositivos personales en las organizaciones, nos ha facilitado esa transición de trabajar en la oficina a trabajar de forma remota. Las arquitecturas ya estaban listas, las herramientas de seguridad también, incluso los procedimientos. Pero es cierto que mandar a miles de personas a trabajar desde casa de forma remota ha supuesto un reto desde el punto de vista de la capacidad. Y además, hablando desde el punto de vista de seguridad, quizás uno de los mayores retos es cómo podemos trasladar las medidas de seguridad física que tenemos en nuestras instalaciones a los domicilios particulares de los empleados, ¿no? Las medidas de seguridad técnicas, la monitorización, las herramientas que tenemos en el SOC, en los propios antivirus, los endpoints, nos garantizan que evidentemente la gestión y el tratamiento de la información en nuestros dispositivos se hace de forma adecuada. Pero ¿qué es lo que ocurre cuando tenemos medidas de seguridad física que están protegiéndonos frente a acciones de fraude y esos mecanismos desaparecen y trabajamos desde casa, ¿no? Ahí hemos tenido que, yo creo, que hacer todos un esfuerzo adicional en ser imaginativos e identificar medidas adicionales que nos pudieran detectar movimientos de fraude u otro tipo de acciones no legítimas que eran muy fácilmente detectables cuando estábamos trabajando en la oficina. Pero sí que podemos decir, y yo creo que eso ha sido una tónica a nivel mundial, ¿no? Los ciberataques se han incrementado, también como decía Laura, los ataques se están incrementando, también es verdad que esa tendencia la hemos estado viendo no durante los últimos meses, sino durante los últimos años, pero sí es verdad que no hemos notado, y no se ha notado tampoco a nivel mundial, que haya bajado la productividad de las organizaciones. La productividad se ha mantenido, las operaciones se han mantenido y hemos podido hacer frente a ese incremento de ciberataques. Y eso es por mi parte, Tim. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alberto. Yes, in terms of speaking of levels productivity, my shoulders nowadays remind me of how much time I spend in front of the computers working nonstop rather than going from one meeting room to another. So that's a... Jamil, I'd also love you to chime in, and maybe you could also add a few comments, and I'm curious, Laura and Alberto, how you're thinking about this within your respective companies. But there have been a lot of reports how one of the impacts of the pandemic has been an accelerated shift toward digital platforms, and that even some of the plans companies have had to migrate or to adopt new technologies has been accelerated by the pandemic. So Jamil, first, how has the pandemic impacted your company, and then to what extent has this acceleration to a digital transformation been something that you've experienced as a result of that? Not sure if it's just me, but I cannot hear you. No. Can the interpreters hear you? Yes. This works.
Sorry, there's like some reverb here. And I wish that I understood what Alberto said, but my Spanish is like a able to fully comprehend that. But in terms of COVID and what we've done, we're in a pretty solid position as we headed into the crisis, and the reason is because we have been undergoing a 3-year transformation to become a leader in security. And as a component of that, what we've done is that we've invested heavily to be able to migrate our assets into the cloud. And so we've made investments around uplifting our applications, bolstering our communication technologies. And as a result, when COVID hit, we were actually pretty well prepared to be able to to lean into. And so aside from things like investing in additional licenses for folks to work from home, conducting additional assessments around individuals in certain locations that don't typically work from home, we had many of the controls in place, and it was really just a business from that perspective. I think what that does is that it speaks to the fact that organizations that are making those types of able to be adaptable and evolve irrespective of what situation may unfold in front of you. And I think the other, aside from just technology and this on control, we have a culture here of crisis planning and crisis management. So exercise with our executive leadership team and with our teams around the globe in a variety of areas. So when this thing hit, we had built that into our muscle, how to respond, who's going to take, how are we going to communicate with the workforce. And as a result, while it wasn't anything anyone desired, and it certainly did create some changes in terms of the way we operate, we were really well positioned to be able to handle it. And I think as a result, the workforce as a whole was able to continue to be productive, and as a company, being able to navigate all of the uncertainty that was generated by virtue of crisis.
Great, thank you, Jamil. And just for those of you I see on the chat, I also apologize. My Spanish is not great, but I think some of you had trouble hearing. So what Jamil mentioned at the beginning when it was still a bit spotty was, one, that the company was really well positioned because of all the work that had gone into better protecting the company in the 3 years before the pandemic broke out, which included a migration to cloud service providers. And that as part of that, the team was well positioned when the pandemic hit to be resilient against the shifting nature of what's happening. If I could maybe have Laura and Alberto chime in briefly, because the cloud is something that comes up often in many conversations. And I was just wondering what advice you may have.
Désolé, nous avons le canal portugais.
If those of you who are currently not on mute could mute yourself, that would be great.
Por favor.
Poderia mutar os seus microfones, por favor?
Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Including the interpreter, if you mind muting yourself, that'd be great. I think it's the Portuguese interpreter. Okay, so Laura and Alberto, the cloud is something that comes up often in these conversations. And to Jamil's point and the transition that his company has made to the cloud already, there have been reports that a lot more organizations are now migrating to the cloud for a number of reasons. How are you thinking about that? And what would be, do you have any advice for the people in the audience for how to think about whether or not to migrate to the cloud and what to take into consideration?
Actually, you want me to go first, Alberto?
Please.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. Ladies first, I guess. Okay, thank you. So great question and great points from Jamil and Alberto. Thank you for those points. From a cloud perspective, yeah, so we've seen a lot of migrations to cloud environments, and it doesn't have to just be one cloud environment. So that is some of my advice, is to think about not just AWS or not just Google or not just any other cloud environment, but think about multiple cloud environments. And then also think about your critical assets. For instance, if you are using Azure Cloud, that's fine, but think about how you're protecting and doing simulations, disaster recovery, business continuity. Think about all of those things when you're thinking about the kind of keys to the kingdom. So if you are using an Azure environment, there's a lot of different tools that you can use to enable multi-factor authentication if you haven't already, and then make sure you're testing out all of those in the broader ecosystem. So if you have multi-cloud environments, you want to test out how that's working in a pandemic situation or in a disaster situation. So that's the first bit of my advice. The second part is, Jamil kind of hit on this a little bit, which is just thinking about how your incident responders, how your security staff is responding with all of those different technologies and ecosystems. If you're multi-cloud, how are you triaging the attacks on the different areas? So if you do have Azure, you do have AWS, how are you ensuring that all of your attacks are visible to you, regardless of what kind of SIM you're using, and how you're able to triage them from the different environments, and then, of course, address them as swiftly as possible?
Ok, sí, desde mi punto de vista, bueno, todos sabemos cuáles son las ventajas, ¿no? del movimiento que podemos hacer hacia cloud, la mejora de la resiliencia de nuestros servicios y de las organizaciones. También sabemos que las grandes organizaciones, la velocidad de migración a cloud o de movimiento hacia el cloud es una velocidad limitada, dada la complejidad de nuestros sistemas, ¿no? Pero sí que es verdad que estamos viendo a nivel mundial un cambio decidido hacia el cloud, ¿no? Y hacia migrar servicios hacia las plataformas en la nube. Quizás la mayor oportunidad que estamos viendo es hacia las pequeñas y medianas empresas, ¿no? Ellas pueden moverse muy rápidamente hacia el cloud, implementar servicios de forma segura hacia el cloud y además, de cierta medida, no olvidarse, pero sí de preocuparse de la gestión de su propia ciberseguridad. Cuando hablamos del sector financiero, no hablamos solamente de las grandes entidades financieras, ¿no? Sí, y los grandes proveedores de servicios financieros, sino de todas aquellas compañías que también están en el sector financiero y que trabajan para nosotros y que de nuestra seguridad depende en gran medida de su seguridad, no solo de la nuestra. Cuando tenemos esas conversaciones con estos operadores financieros, estas pequeñas empresas y medianas empresas financieras, y nos piden opinión de cómo pueden rápidamente mejorar su ciberseguridad, evidentemente el cloud es una alternativa muy adecuada por la facilidad de despliegue y además por la propia gestión de los servicios en cloud. Yo creo que seguiremos viendo de aquí en adelante una migración por parte de todas las organizaciones hacia el cloud, teniendo en cuenta también los diferentes condicionantes que el cloud que tiene y que tenemos que considerar, pero yo creo que existe una oportunidad y en ese sentido hablamos con las pequeñas y medianas empresas para que sea una de las primeras opciones a la hora de implantar servicios de ciberseguridad, ¿no? Que estos estén en cloud y que vayan hacia una seguridad gestionada y no tanto a que las compañías sean expertos en ciberseguridad. Ellos son expertos en otras cosas, ¿no? En proveer servicios financieros, pero no en ser expertos en ciberseguridad. Esa es de mi parte.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'll chime in here real quick. I think one of the key lessons here is that, as it relates to the cloud, is that the cloud affords us an outstanding opportunity, I think, in the face of COVID. And the reason is because from a labor standpoint, from a capacity standpoint, the ability to be able to leverage an infrastructure that isn't on-premise provides you, and I apologize if I'm repeating what you said, Alberto, but I don't understand exactly what you said. So just tell me and I'll stop. But to have the ability to be able to remotely manage and administer a particular infrastructure, and then the applications that lay on top of it, is tremendously valuable in the face of something like this, where much of the workforce is going to be working remotely. So I think that's one critical benefit here. And I think that builds on top of the other benefits of the cloud, one of which I think is oftentimes misunderstood and sometimes misrepresented. And that is that the cloud has the opportunity to provide organizations with better security than do on-prem environments. There's this notion, and I think there's this fear and uncertainty around cloud, maybe because it's new, and because there's some level of sort of innovative aspects and uncertainty around it. But I think that if you do it correctly, if you do the cloud right, if you have a strong development pipeline in place with your security controls built into it, if you have things like we've done, for example, with meaningful cloud assurance, so that you can consistently monitor the environment, you can do things in the cloud that you cannot do on-prem. I don't have the ability. There is no tool out there certainly with a heterogeneous environment, that allows me to be able to consistently monitor every resource across and every control across my on-prem environment. But I can do that in the cloud. I can do that there, and it gives me a level of assurance and visibility that I can't have elsewhere. And so I think that the dual benefits from a security and crisis standpoint, to be able to operate it remotely, is really, really powerful. And certainly if you are a small to medium-sized organization, it provides even more benefit, because in those situations, unlike Equifax, for example, where we invested $1.5 billion towards becoming a leader in security, so we have the resources, and so we're able to bring whatever we need to bear. Small to medium-sized businesses don't necessarily have that level of resourcing. And so when you can leverage the power of one of these major infrastructure providers, AWS, Google, Microsoft, or Azure, it really helps you to uplift your security posture, because you're getting the benefit of all the security knowledge and expertise that they can bring to bear as well. So I think there's a variety of benefits of migrating, not just from a business perspective, but also from a continuity and security one.
Thank you, Jamil. And I kind of knew when I brought up cloud that, it would take us into a very animated discussion, and it has already generated some questions as well. So first off, there's one question from the audience that I will share with you in a second, but I already wanted to point out that for the audience, if you're specifically interested in the cloud, we could spend hours just talking about that, so I will move on shortly. But I did want to point out that Carnegie just released a paper last month that was a deep dive into the benefits and considerations that go into whether or not to migrate to the cloud. Jamil, you just pointed out the difference between large and small or medium-sized organizations. I think sometimes there's a bit of a myth that if you migrate to the cloud, you don't need your IT team anymore, whereas in fact, you actually need to retrain them to make that migration happen and to make sure you don't accidentally leave a setting like Capital One, and then you have to deal with certain outcomes after that. So for those of you, there is this resource that I encourage you to take a look at, but the specific question that came up is, what reflection can you make regarding the relationship between the materialization of risks associated with the cloud and the weakness in the rigor with which organizations carry out the implementations or migrations to the cloud? So this goes to the question of what are the risks associated with migrating to the cloud, and what can you do to actually mitigate them? And maybe you can speak a little bit about the shared responsibility model and also some of the assistance that's being provided by CSPs. And then I will move on and have a few other questions. But whoever among the three of you would like to tackle this one, please go ahead.
I'm happy to start. I think the risks in the cloud are largely focused on, for the security risks in the cloud, are largely focused around configurations. And I think you made a great point there with the Capital One example. Whether it's a firewall rule set that you misconfigure and allow sort of any configuration and traffic into the environment or whatever, there's a whole host of them. And I think the biggest challenge for me is each one of those configurations actually are different, and they have different nomenclatures across each one of the different cloud providers. And so you may be an expert at AWS, but those same policies and controls aren't identical when you move over to GCP. And I think for most organizations nowadays, you tend to be multi-cloud, and so you have to have that level of expertise across both. And then it goes into in my opinion, arguably the bigger challenge, and that's not around the security controls themselves and the risk generated there. It's actually around the labor and the skills and expertise to be able to effectively understand those environments and then secure them. One of the things that we've done, aside from just training up our folks and doing a great job, and we've bolstered our security workforce by roughly 1,000 over the course of the past couple of years. So aside from that, what we've done is we've gone through and we've procured training so that everyone within the organization has the opportunity to learn about the cloud. And we have very specialized deep training for things like security architects and engineers and things like that. But we've also opened it up so that everyone in the entire company has the opportunity to be able to learn more about the cloud, because if we're going to be a cloud-first organization, we want everyone to understand not just the risks and so forth but also the technical capabilities and what we can leverage this for. So we're trying to uplift the skills and knowledge across the entire company. And I think that if you don't have that level of visibility and understanding about the cloud, then it can generate some risk. But there are meaningful ways to be able to get around that. And then I think going back to my previous point, even though configurations can cause risk, generate risk, there are tools out there and there are capabilities out there that, again, allow you to be able to monitor real time all of those configurations across all of those different platforms, and then set your policies such that you will not allow those configurations to actually even occur. And I think, again, that puts us in the position where we have the ability and the control and the opportunity to be able to make those environments even more secure than we would if we were going to be doing it on-prem.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I think that's...
Coincidiendo con Yamil, cuando evidentemente... Sí, cuando tenemos los sistemas on-premise en nuestras instalaciones, tenemos un control total sobre las infraestructuras y sobre los aplicativos, ¿no? Y es relativamente sencillo la aplicación y el cumplimiento de las políticas y estándares de seguridad de la organización, ¿no? Cuando pasamos al cloud, evidentemente, y coincidiendo con Yamil, es más complejo el poder verificar y trasladar nuestras políticas y estándares de seguridad al cloud, ¿no? En este caso, y por la experiencia que nosotros tenemos, la única alternativa posible es la comprobación de cada uno de los controles que tenemos establecidos en nuestros estándares, si estos se cumplen en la parte del cloud. Y aquí entra en algunos casos la imposibilidad de poder mantener esos controles en el cloud, porque pueden ser diferentes, o incluso la poca visibilidad que se puede tener en algunos controles específicos, ¿no? Y aquí entra también en juego la parte de negociación y el entendimiento con el proveedor de cloud, ¿no? Para intentar hacer esa correlación de los estándares propios, así estos estándares se cumplen al 100% en la parte de cloud, ¿no? No existe, yo creo, una contestación mágica, uniforme, que pueda dar solución a los riesgos de cloud, pero nuestra estrategia que hemos seguido, evidentemente, es intentar verificar que los estándares y políticas que estamos estableciendo en nuestros sistemas, podemos verificar que se están cumpliendo nuestros servicios en cloud.
Yeah, great points, Alberto and Jamil. Thank you. I'm just going to pull on the thread a little bit more on the preparedness. You know, I think Jamil was making great points about the need for staff to be trained. But one specific part of preparedness when you're doing a cloud migration is thinking about maybe some of the things you already have in place, for instance, vulnerability management, and thinking about how that's going to change in a cloud environment. For instance, you may remember API vulnerabilities, but in the cloud environment, you're really going to have to change your paradigm or the way that you're approaching remediation of vulnerabilities or even looking for vulnerabilities, because most of those things are going to be API driven. So training your vulnerability management staff and thinking about how to address those vulnerabilities in a different way. They may know how to do it already, but it's going to be very different with immutable infrastructure, or something that you have to spin up very quickly and then it spins down very quickly. You may not want to have, you know, such strict policies around it to the point where, you know, where the technology team that's remediating it is going to be grinding halt in terms of spinning up like a virtual instance, for instance. So I think it's really important to think about, when you think about cloud risk, is just think about all the things you already have as far as cyber risk, and think about how it's going to work in a cloud environment and how it's going to be different. So just preparing for that so that you're able to address it more swiftly in a cloud environment, because to Jamil's point, it's great to be able to spin things up quickly, have the infrastructure available, and then do the things that you need to do from a business perspective. And you know how to secure it, you just have to think about how to secure it in a different way.
And one question that was just shared with through the audience, and by the way, I wanted to say hello to Magda and Addis Abeba. I saw that we don't only have participants from Latin American countries, but also further away. So good afternoon to you in Ethiopia. One of the questions that was shared through the audience is, what is your opinion about the different laws that exist in each country with respect to cloud services? And how does that impact how you, with respect to your company, think through the use of cloud service providers? Does this play a role? Does it not really play much of a role? And what kind of recommendations, also considering the audience, would you have for regulators right now for how to think through cloud service providers and national legislation?
Who wants to go first on that? I'll go. So really important to think about laws, obviously, because you know, depending on obviously where you're sitting, there's going to be different laws on localization, for instance, and you have to adhere to them. So really, again, important to think about them. Think about how you're going to localize the data if that's one of the laws of the environment. For us, we took a look at those laws. We partnered greatly with our regulators and our legal staff and compliance staff. We made sure that we were just prepared when we were creating the infrastructure in the different environments for adhering to those regulations. If it required localization, we just made sure we did that. And if it required too much overhead, then we just decided not to store certain aspects of the data in that local region.
Great. Alberto, if I could, I want to move on from the cloud discussion, even though I think it's a very important one. But there are a couple of other pieces that I want to touch on. One is with respect to Latin America and some of the specific situations that countries and financial institutions face in the Latin American region. What are your key takeaways looking back at now 8 months of the pandemic? What do you expect to be the key lessons learned moving forward, and what would you recommend people to focus on in the coming months?
Gracias por la pregunta. Bueno, lo que hemos visto en estos meses es que COVID-19 se ha caracterizado fundamentalmente también por una restricción en los movimientos, ¿no? Pues de todos los ciudadanos. Hemos visto cómo las fronteras se han cerrado en muchos países, ¿no? Ha bajado el tráfico aéreo e incluso el movimiento por carretera. Estas restricciones en el movimiento lo que ha producido, si hablamos de los grupos cibercriminales y los grupos criminales, lo que ha producido es que ha habido muchas más dificultades, por ejemplo, en el contrabando. El contrabando ha sido más difícil, ¿no?, de ejecutar. Y lo que hemos visto es que ha habido grupos criminales que tradicionalmente se han movido en el entorno físico tradicional, que se han empezado a mover al mundo cyber, ¿no? Tampoco es algo nuevo, porque estamos viendo que en los últimos años muchos grupos criminales se están moviendo al ciberespacio, ¿no? ¿Y esto qué es lo en qué ha impactado? Bueno, no sobre todo en ataques muy sofisticados, sino lo que sí hemos visto es un incremento importante en los ataques de ransomware, por ejemplo, en toda la región. Ataques de ransomware que, como sabemos, van dirigidos fundamentalmente a aquellas organizaciones que tienen un nivel de seguridad más bajo, pero que además nos afectan, porque son entidades que trabajan para nosotros. Entonces, si volviésemos atrás, como preguntabas, Tim, una de las cosas que quizás trabajaríamos más intensamente, y ya estamos trabajando ahora, es elevar el nivel de seguridad, no solamente de nuestras propias organizaciones, sino de aquellas third parties que están trabajando con nosotros. Y también el nivel de seguridad de nuestros propios clientes, ¿no?, y de los propios ciudadanos. Una situación que hemos encontrado en estos meses en la región es también el incremento de campañas de phishing a clientes, ¿no? Clientes que en muchos de los casos no tienen el adecuado nivel de conocimiento para discernir si un correo electrónico es un correo electrónico legítimo o es un correo electrónico fraudulento, ¿no? Entonces, esos dos fenómenos, campañas de ransomware y campañas de phishing orientadas a clientes, nos ha impactado de forma importante en la región. Y quizás no es solo lo que teníamos que trabajar antes, sino lo que tenemos que trabajar de aquí en adelante. Yo creo que es un trabajo de todos, no solamente de las entidades financieras, es un trabajo de las organizaciones públicas, del sector privado, del sector financiero y del resto de sectores, en el que tenemos que trabajar en incrementar el nivel de concienciación de nuestros clientes y de nuestros ciudadanos, porque ello va a robustecer el sistema de seguridad del sector financiero. Eso es todo por mi parte, Tim.
Thank you, Alberto. And that's a great segue, Jamil, to a question I've been meaning to ask you in terms of the changing threat landscape. We recently saw an incident in Chile that was very disruptive, and we've seen the Lazarus Group hitting countries around the world, specifically also using ransomware attacks. So if we look at the evolution of the threat landscape, the last few years, but then also the last several months, what are some of the key takeaways has the landscape shifted? Have ordinary criminals that can no longer, carry out crime on the street all of a sudden taken on to cybercrime, or Have we not really seen that shift? Give us a sense for what you've seen from your perspective in terms of the threat landscape right now.
Sure. Well, I think that hacking has always kind of been a work from home job to begin with. So I'm not sure that it's really disrupted them. It's they're more used to it probably than we are. I don't know that the landscape itself has changed dramatically. I think what's happened is that the attack surface has changed. So as we have more people from our workforce working from home, it obviously exacerbates some of the same challenges that we've always faced, and the attacks are largely the same. I mean, you mentioned Lazarus. Now there's, I somewhat don't entirely believe that it's actually the Lazarus group that's been executing some of the attacks that have been going on. I think a lot of it is copycat organizations that try to use the Lazarus name or the Fancy Bear name or the Armada Collective name as a way to be able to improve and increase their credibility, which will likely increase the likelihood that they'll get some of the ransoms and extortions that they've been asking for. But there's no question that they've been active throughout this time frame, and quite frankly, it makes sense to me because organizations are more reliant on technology today than they've ever been. And so if you have an opportunity to disrupt that, whether it's through a denial of service attack or a specific ransomware attack, it opens up the door to profit off of it. And there's bad people out there that want to be able to exploit it. But when you look at the attacks themselves, they're not meaningfully different than they have been for the past, 5 years, decade. And as a result, I think we need to just continue to bring to bear many of the same types of controls that we have been to be able to stop them. We need to be more diligent because the attack surface is larger, but they're the same. I think one of the things that I'm proud of that we've done here is we've put a heavy emphasis on training and awareness for the workforce. And we went so far as to have implemented an awareness program whereby we're able to provide every single month a tailored scorecard for every single employee in the entire company, including contractors, that tells them how well they're doing in terms of security behaviors. This includes things like their click-through rates for phishing attacks, their reporting rates for those things, their effectiveness and timeliness for taking security training courses that we have, any violations as it relates to the data loss prevention activities and things like that. And what that's done is it's put security at the forefront. So they're consistently able to see not just what behaviors are good and which ones are bad, but it helps reinforce the correct ones. And we even provide a scorecard that has a benchmarking of each individual as it relates to the specific organization they're in, the company as a whole, and then the industry at large as well. And those data points really help to change behavior so that they're able to more effectively protect against the threats. And let's be honest, that every employee that we have, that truly is the front line of our defenses every single day. And I think a lot of organizations view it as, well, security is going to do their thing and security is security's job. But look, my view is that if I talk to some random person in the organization and I ask them who's responsible for security, and they point back at me because I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, then I haven't done my job. Then everyone needs to realize that security is everybody's responsibility. And that's one of the crucial elements, I think, for any organization is shifting the culture, shifting that mindset so that everyone understands how accountable to security and the effectiveness of it every single individual is that walks through that door every day.
Great. And before I go to you, Laura, and Alberto, and then back to the Q&A, Jimmy, let me ask you this, because we have 439 participants on this call. We know a lot of people have been hacked, but let's just say not everybody has been hacked who's been on this call. And we all know it's not a question of if, but when you've been hacked. You've become the CISO of Home Depot and Equifax after major incidents hit both of those companies. So you're apparently one of the guys that you call once something bad has happened to fix things to avoid it from happening again. So what would be your key kind of advice for what do you need to do in the immediate aftermath of an incident? What are some of the lessons learned from you having served in those two organizations for people to think through once something has already happened?
Sure. I think the key point is this. When you come in post breach, there is a lot of chaos. Organizations are on their heels. The morale of the workforce is certainly less than desirable. People are beat down. They've been working 24 hours a day for the however many months previously. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. In many cases, individuals at high-level positions and lower ones have lost their jobs, and so it's a challenging situation. And trust me, having seen it firsthand, no one ever wants to be in this situation. Your customers are unhappy. The regulators are scrutinizing you. It's a tough situation. But here's the deal. If you do some of the core things up front, you don't have to ever be in this situation, or at least dramatically reduce the likelihood that it's going to occur. And if it does, it's going to be far more mild than it would be otherwise. And I think the number one thing that any organization can apply effort toward today to be able to mitigate stuff and put themselves in a better position is emphasize culture. We oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, I've come up through the ranks as a technical person. I always gravitate to technology. I'm passionate about it. I think it's cool and fun. But organizations tend to look more toward those technical solutions and those silver bullets and the shiny toys that are going to somehow solve all of the world's hunger. And that's just not the case. The better investment is to focus on your culture of your organization. So, for example, one of the things that we did here at Equifax was that we elevated the role of security such that my job reports directly to the CEO. So it gives me the ability to be able to have influence and authority and visibility, quite frankly, across the entire environment, which allows me to do my job more effectively. Another point, we instituted a security measure in our annual bonus plan such that every bonus eligible employee, everybody, it doesn't matter if you're in technology or security, every single bonus eligible person has a security metric that if we do not meet our targets for each year, then you have a meaningful haircut on your potential bonus every single year. And look, we all come to work to get paid, and so it's a pretty strong incentive when you have security tied directly into your financial performance for the year, and it changes behaviors, going back to my previous point. And then I think finally, really emphasizing partnership. When you look at what happened at Equifax, we were attacked by a nation state, China, and the military arm of one with the PLA. And we had the indictment by working with the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, very, very closely. And we had an indictment this past January, which is great. But the only reason that comes to bear is because we worked so closely and we partnered with them along the way. And when I look at the broader ecosystem and the threats to your previous question, my organization, any individual organization, can't defend against a nation state that's directly targeting them by themselves. You can't. It doesn't matter if I have $1.5 billion or not. It's going to be tough for me to be able to stop a government that's targeting me like that. And so the only way we survive in this situation, the only way we can be successful is to all work together. And whether it's through forums like this and building relationships this way, whether it's working with our customers to be able to establish strong information exchange about best practices for technology implementation, threat intelligence sharing, and things like that, or it's working with the authorities like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, like the Secret Service here locally, like the World Economic Forum, like these different groups. I don't think we are positioning ourselves as effectively as we could be, which is why we've spent so much time working with all these organizations so that we can help not just ourselves, but help the community at large. And I think that's the key to success.
Great, thank you. And also, I like the quick reference to the World Food Program winning the Nobel Peace Prize with your reference to hunger. So that's great, yesterday's news. Laura, Alberto, one of the questions we received, and this builds to your point, Jamil, about, there are certain actors out there that you can't effectively protect against. One of the things that is available for when an incident happens is insurance. And one of the questions is, how do you see cybersecurity and insurance contracts for the protection of information?
You want me to go that far? we're so polite. So I think cyber, they used to call it cyber liability insurance, but cyber insurance is important. We have a really great relationship with our cyber insurers. They do protect, especially in a situation of ransomware. So they do help provide a level of oversight and assistance. We were talking about ransomware, and yes, none of this stuff is new, but the paradigm has shifted to the point where you have to address it very swiftly. The extortion part of it has changed over this past year. And so having that relationship with your insurers, I think, is critical. You do have to have those conversations about what would happen in the middle of a ransomware event today, right? If you only have 24 hours to communicate back to the actor, you want to make sure you have a good understanding ahead of time what your insurers are expecting of you, or if they are going to cover you at all. Right, so I think we all have seen some of these enormous payouts. So you do have to figure out, is your insurance going to be covered at that level? So just ask really good questions from the insurers if you don't already have cyber insurance, and then think about what protocols that you have to put in place to ensure you can actually materialize the funds after the ransomware attack has happened. And again, just keep in mind, the paradigm is that this is a very fast extortion-related situation that has increased over this year. So, swiftness is key. Doing simulations is also key, even with your executive staff. I think it's really important that somebody makes the decision to pay or not to pay. And of course, you want to think about your publicity on paying, right? Your public affairs folks are going to want to know, what does this mean for a company if we decide to pay a ransom? Because I think we've all seen what happens in the news when it's covered by the journalists. So you do want to prepare. Your insurers are part of that preparedness.
Sí, complementando a Laura, he tenido la oportunidad de ver en los últimos 5 o 6 años la evolución de los productos de seguro, ¿no? Y han tenido una evolución importante. El gran problema que tienen, ¿no?, las diferentes aseguradoras y los diferentes productos son los datos históricos, ¿no? Como sabemos, en seguros, por ejemplo, de los autos, de los coches, los datos históricos son muy importantes a la hora de determinar la prima. ¿Qué ocurre en el ámbito de la ciberseguridad? Sí, es verdad que hemos tenido a nivel mundial decenas de miles o cientos de miles de ciberataques con impactos, pero no existe unanimidad y uniformidad en el análisis de esos datos históricos y en determinar exactamente cuál es el valor de la prima de un seguro, ¿no? Entonces, a día de hoy es verdad que este campo ha evolucionado bastante y vemos diferentes ofertas, pero con diferentes productos totalmente diferentes entre ellos, con diferentes aproximaciones, incluso algunos que son bastante intrusivas, es decir, que podemos contratar un seguro pero nos están obligando a poder acceder a nuestra información, a nuestros sistemas para garantizar que tenemos un nivel de seguridad adecuado. Pero como contestación a la pregunta, evidentemente, yo creo y coincido con Laura que es importante, si podemos tener un seguro que nos añada una capa no de protección y los gastos que este ciberataque ha producido, ¿no? Pero sí es verdad que en este momento ha habido bastantes avances, pero seguimos sin tener uniformidad en el número de productos y servicios en el ámbito de los seguros, ¿no?
Thank you both, and apologies for a second. The dog was barking very loudly. Now that I'm back online. One of the questions I had for all three of you is, on the one hand, what kind of advice would you have for the regulators and government authorities across Latin America right now? Because we at Carnegie, we are a think tank. We have the ability to engage with a lot of different stakeholders, and we are neither industry nor regulator, so we can have So could the translator who's translating into Spanish mute herself? That's okay, thank you. I tried to concentrate, but I get harder and harder. What advice would you give to the regulators and the government authorities? Because at Carnegie, we engage with both industry actors and regulators as well. And I think there are a fair amount of regulators and government agencies that are also still trying to figure out what are the best policies in this space. So my first question to you is, what would be your advice to them? And then I would ask you also thereafter, what is your advice to your industry counterparts? So what can industry do better as well? And similar to the notion of a shared responsibility models for cloud service providers, we at Carnegie do believe that to actually effectively protect against cyber threats, it can't just be industry alone. It cannot just be governments alone, because to Jamil's point, you may have some state-sponsored actors that industry cannot effectively protect against. And then from the government perspective, the financial sector is one of many critical infrastructures. And frankly, usually governments tell us, why should we pay a lot of attention to the financial sector? They have a lot of cash. They can protect themselves. We have to focus on the ones that don't have as much cash. So first question, what would be your recommendations for the regulators and government agencies? And then I'll ask you, what can industry do, should be doing?
I'll start on that one. I think, I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not, but earlier this year, I think it was in March, there was a commission that was established with recommendations called the Solarian Commission, and it's for the United States. But it was the recommendations, and of which there are, I think, roughly 70 some, to be able to bolster cybersecurity for the defense of the nation, for the commercial sector, for even to be able to help bolster security for private citizens. This commission came up with outstanding recommendations, and it spans across things like cybersecurity and foreign policy, deterrence mechanisms for the nation, better public-private partnership, and information exchange therein. And I think it's first off, it's the best national strategy set of recommendations that I've seen in cybersecurity in my entire career. So I commend them for that. But I think that to your question, taking a similar approach, and I think that a lot of the recommendations would apply to virtually any region or any country, applying some of those same recommendations more broadly would be extraordinarily beneficial. Because I don't necessarily buy into the argument that, hey, just because a company is large and has a lot of money, that somehow that they're immune to any types of threats. I do agree that small to medium-sized organizations need additional assistance, and I think a lot of that assistance, whether it's through intelligence or defensive measures, or it's even from the vendor community, assistance to be able to help protect their infrastructure and their assets, I think is a necessary thing. But I think one of the things as COVID has shown us is that many organizations, many countries aren't necessarily as prepared from a continuity of the economy standpoint as maybe they should be. And while today we're facing a pandemic as it relates to this virus, I think that it's not outside the realm of possibility that tomorrow we may be facing one that's related to cyber. Targeting whether it's the utilities or healthcare or whatever it may be. I think it poses a meaningful risk to the effective continuity of any country and maybe globally as well. And so I think that it's an important issue, and I think that there's no singular answer, no singular solve for it across any of those kind of communities, but I think a collective effort across the different spaces and the different key organizations would put us in a far better position, because I'm not sure that we're prepared to the degree that we should be as it stands today.
Alberto?
Yes. Complementando lo que decía Yamil, yo no me atrevo a dar una recomendación, un consejo a los reguladores, ¿no?, ni a los organismos del gobierno. Lo que sí puedo decir y compartir es la opinión que tenemos, o que tengo yo, respecto a cómo debemos trabajar en el ámbito de ciberseguridad. Como decía Yamil, la ciberseguridad no es un asunto específico de nosotros, ¿no?, de las entidades financieras, sino también de las entidades públicas, del gobierno, de las fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado, de la Fiscalía, del Poder Judicial. De poco sirve que nosotros tengamos unos niveles de protección adecuados, ¿no?, que estén atacando, nos estemos protegiendo, si aquellos grupos que lo están haciendo no son perseguidos, juzgados y encarcelados, ¿no? El problema va a seguir persistiendo. Pero eso es muy importante, que trabajemos, como decía Yamil, en el ámbito de la colaboración, intercambiando información y teniendo una visión compartida del problema. Algo que es bastante curioso, aunque es bastante básico, es que cuando alguien sufre un incidente, el que ha sufrido el incidente es la víctima, no es el culpable. El que sufre un ciberataque es la víctima del ciberataque y no es culpable de ello. Es verdad que se pueden hacer las cosas mejor, ¿no? Pero yo hablaría de que siempre es posible hacer las cosas mejor y no que hemos hecho las cosas mal, porque evidentemente siempre hay una parte contraria que es la que está haciendo las acciones ilícitas y ilegales. Por lo tanto, yo centraría que el trabajo que tenemos que hacer las entidades financieras con las entidades públicas y los reguladores, tenemos que trabajar en la colaboración, en el entendimiento de la situación, en un entendimiento conjunto y intercambiar información. Y por último, respecto a la industria, ¿no? Yo me remito al año 2008-2009 en el caso de Stuxnet, ¿no? Todos sabemos que supuestamente Stuxnet, el malware, fue introducido con USB. En aquel entonces, año 2008-2009, la industria de ciberseguridad ya estaba proveyendo tecnologías adecuadas para protegernos frente a ciberataques. Pero el problema fue pues, no tener habilitados los puertos USB y haber introducido un USB sin estar controlado, ¿no? Y si vemos los recientes ataques que se han producido a nivel mundial, es cierto que hemos visto ataques que pueden estar supuestamente organizados por estados, que son ataques muy sofisticados y que requieren, por lo tanto, de adecuada tecnología, pero muchos de los ciberataques exitosos que hemos visto y que han tenido un impacto considerable se han producido mediante ciberataques muy sencillos, explotando vulnerabilidades conocidas y atacando sistemas sin parchear. Por lo tanto, yo creo que tenemos un margen de mejora en la cultura de ciberseguridad de las organizaciones, en que, como decía Yamil también, todos los empleados tienen que trabajar en ciberseguridad, no solo los equipos de ciberseguridad, y que tenemos que identificar nuestros puntos débiles. Creo que la industria de ciberseguridad está avanzando a muy buen ritmo, tenemos tecnologías muy avanzadas y vamos a ver en los próximos años que seguirá siendo así, pero nuestros puntos débiles no son tanto en falta de tecnología, sino en la aplicabilidad de la tecnología, en el control de los procesos y en el propio trabajo de nuestros propios empleados y de nuestros propios clientes, ¿no? Hablaba antes de las campañas de phishing. Podemos tener problemas de ciberseguridad no directamente a través nuestras, sino a través de nuestros clientes. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alberto. And I think we need to wrap up at 11:15. I was just told by the conference organizers. So, Laura, if I could invite you maybe to share a few words on this and also on the industry question.
Yeah, sure. So as part of the World Economic Forum, I was the co-chair. I think we're finishing that up this year for the Global Future Council. And one of the areas we concentrated on was just intelligence sharing. So there's an insights paper that we just published this month. I encourage everybody to go read it. It's the topic that I really want to bring through, which is how important it is to share this intelligence, share those tactics, those techniques and protocols of the actors. That's extremely important to the ecosystem that we're all living in, regardless of our industry. Because Jamel's point about, we're going to be attacked, we're never going to have the funds to always suppress nation-state actors. We have to therefore share this intelligence with each other, regardless of what industry in, or even if we're competitors for that reason, right? So it doesn't matter where we are. We should be sharing of intelligence information. There's a lot of ISACs that are out there that you can share the intelligence with. You don't have to be in the FS ISAC, for instance, but also to the regulators. We don't want to institute certain regulations that are going to make it difficult for us to share information, right? That's really important, that for us practitioners, we feel like we can share without a lot of scrutiny on what it is that we're allowed to share, right? Anytime I have conversations with any of the legal folks in my company, it's very important that I have their agreement on sharing the information, but also I don't want them to feel that if we shared, that means I'm going to be publicized in the media, right? So it's a fine line that I really wish we would not have, so that we feel compelled to share more often than less. And again, that goes across all industries. Even sharing with Interpol, for example, I think that if they were able to share some of their TTPs with us, it would be very good for us to continue down the path of what we all want to do, which is to prevent the criminals from attacking.
Great, thank you, Laura. And the good news is we were just giving another 15 minutes. So clearly kudos to you all, because there are lots of additional questions we've received. So we are going to continue until 11:30. Jamila and Alberto, could I invite you to come in and maybe also share what your thoughts are on what is it that industry could do better? And let me maybe add one point. We recently created a working group at Carnegie focused on the workforce, where we brought together 10 major financial institutions, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, several others, who've now filled out a survey on how they think about addressing workforce challenges. If we look at COVID-19 and the increase in unemployment rates across the world and in many of the countries that are here today, the workforce challenge is going to be one that will be with us for the coming months, and how to address unemployment. And the interesting piece is we have the cybersecurity shortage. So there may actually be an opportunity in the current pandemic crisis that some of this could be used with respect to addressing the cybersecurity workforce challenges, be it with building a better pipeline, be it with helping address the diversity challenges. Could you maybe expand a little bit on what you think industry should be doing more broadly to better protect, to increase cybersecurity, but then also specifically on what you may be doing with respect to the workforce, or what you think would be worth considering in the coming months, given that there may be a window of opportunity to drive some of those specific initiatives forward?
I'll start. Yeah, I think there's a variety of things. First off, I want to make a comment that maybe, I don't know, if you go back a decade from the vendor community standpoint, there was this notion, there still kind of is, but it's not as prevalent, this notion that that a singular organization is going to try to provide you with one comprehensive, unified solution for all of your security problems. And thanks, and then Laura mentioned this earlier as it relates to APIs. Thanks to APIs, we're able to actually take advantage of the best tools across that, because most of them now interoperate with each other. And so I think that's been a godsend, honestly. But I think that vendors, and I'm not sure that this can really change, but vendors need to emphasize more about interoperability with the current processes and technologies that organizations have today, because there has been, I mean, I can't tell you how many tools that I've evaluated or that we've tried to bring to bear at different organizations I've worked for, that they might be great as a point solution, but they don't work with anything else. And when you have the labor challenge that you just mentioned, Tim, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to be able to support this cornucopia of different tool sets, to be able to solve every little tiny point issue, and then integrate it all so that you can make sense of it and actually decision and action it therein. And so I think that I would love to see greater innovation in that space, and I would love to be able to see greater solutions as it relates to operational efficiency of the security program, so that we can operate more effectively to be able to combat the bad guys. On the labor side, there's no doubt that there is a challenge as it relates to the skills and the experience and the supply of talent in this space. It's well worn, right? I mean, whatever the number is, we're down 2 or 3 million jobs that people are looking for, things like that. I think on one hand, to your point, it provides an outstanding opportunity for different states, countries, regions to be able to upskill and then provide very well-paying jobs to their citizens, while at the same time helping us to solve for the labor challenges we have in the security space. But I think the other key component is that oftentimes as CISOs, and I'm a victim of this myself, where we look for these unicorn skill sets. And we say, hey, I want to get this cloud architect that also has engineering experience and is a great risk manager and blah, blah. And you're never going to find that person. And I think oftentimes when you hear security people say, oh, it's so hard to find somebody good, it's because we're looking for these unicorns that are out there, and they just don't generally exist. So instead, what we've done is we've focused, sure, we look for those folks, and we hire outstandingly talented people, but what we do is that we try to uplift them. We try to upskill those people. And so we've put more of an emphasis on developing the individuals that work for us than we do on trying to find that unicorn that's somewhere out there. Not to mention, even if you found that person, it would cost you an arm and a leg to begin with. But I think that by contributing and developing our own people, we're doing right by them. We're helping to improve the security posture of our own organization, and at the same time, we're building and developing the next generation of security leaders. And to me, certainly one of the top things I want to do while I'm at Equifax is to be a leader and make sure that we're the most secure organization out there. But the other piece for me that I think is really, really important and really I'm passionate and it drives me is my coaching dream, is having the opportunity to be able to mentor and grow and develop all of the talent around us, so that they can be best positioned to realize their maximum abilities and for them to have very fruitful careers in their own right. And I think when all is said and done, if I can look back and say, man, look at all these great people I had the opportunity to be able to work with, and I did one small, tiny little thing to be able to help them really realize their potential, then I think it's great for them and I think it's great for the community at large.
Sí, centrándome en la parte de talento, sabemos que el sector de la ciberseguridad está creciendo a un ritmo del 12 al 13% anual en los últimos 4 o 5 años, ¿no? Podemos decir que hay muy pocos sectores productivos que estén creciendo a ese ritmo. Sabemos todos que hay una demanda enorme de profesionales, de millones de profesionales en el ámbito de las tecnologías y de la ciberseguridad, y que tenemos muy pocos profesionales para ocupar esos puestos, y esto va a suponer una limitante a la hora de mejorar nuestros niveles de protección. Yo creo que debemos ir al origen del problema, ¿no? Oportunidad de trabajo hay, los jóvenes tienen una oportunidad enorme de desarrollarse profesionalmente en este campo, de tener buenos salarios, de tener además puestos permanentes y con mucha seguridad, pero tenemos que ir al origen del problema. ¿Por qué tenemos esa demanda de profesionales y tan poca oferta, ¿no? Si miramos un poco los centros universitarios, no solamente en América, sino en Europa, en otros países, es cierto que en muchos países ha caído el número de estudiantes de carreras técnicas. Está cayendo el número de estudiantes en algunos países, ¿no? Aunque hay una oferta, hay una demanda enorme de profesionales. Y yo creo que tiene que ver con el interés que se genera entre los jóvenes para poder dedicarse a estas carreras técnicas. Y para mejorar ese interés yo creo que es un trabajo de todos, no solamente de las entidades privadas. Debe ser una estrategia de gobiernos, debe ser una estrategia de países, de entidades privadas, por supuesto, y de la sociedad en general, ¿no? De intentar generar mayor interés entre los jóvenes a dedicarse a este tipo de profesiones. Este mito ya lo estamos rompiendo, pero yo creo que podemos irnos también más atrás, en los años 80, ¿no? La imagen del hacker que está en casa metido sin relacionarse con nadie, ¿no? La gente joven no quiere identificarse con ese estereotipo de hacker, ¿no? Y sobre todo hablabas, Tim, de diversidad, ¿no? Pues cuando hablamos de mujeres, y aquí la OEA está trabajando muy intensamente en este tema, claro, cuando hablamos con mujeres, claro, muchas de ellas dicen, yo no me quiero parecer al hacker de los años 80, yo quiero ser una persona normal, que tenga relaciones normales, ¿no? Y una vida normal. Entonces, tenemos que trabajar desde la base, rompiendo estereotipos, que ya lo estamos haciendo, buscar referentes mujeres, pero también masculinas, referentes en los que se puedan identificar los jóvenes. Sabemos que los jóvenes se identifican con futbolistas, con actores. Tenemos que buscar también que los jóvenes se identifiquen con personas referentes de este sector e incentivar que se dediquen a esta profesión. Yo creo que el problema no está tanto ni en la formación, porque existe mucha oferta formativa, tanto a nivel universitario como a nivel de formación profesional, cursos de especialización, en muchos casos, además gratuita, subvencionadas por las empresas, subvencionadas por los gobiernos, por organizaciones internacionales. Yo creo que tenemos que ir un poco más a la raíz del problema. Vamos a tener, ya lo tenemos, el reto, pero va a ser el reto mayor en los próximos años, y si no conseguimos mejorar ese número de jóvenes que se quieren interesar en este campo, vamos a tener un problema importante que va a limitar la protección de nuestras organizaciones.
Thank you, Alberto. And Laura, yeah. Do you want to chime in as well?
Yes, please. No, this is great, Alberto, Jamil. Thank you for those comments. I think it's great to hear, first of all, the just the focus, right, on diversity. Extremely important. As a diverse person in cybersecurity, I can tell you I don't identify with the male hacker in the hoodie. However, somebody can challenge me whether or not I have the skills. That's totally fine. What I think is important, again, echoing everything that Jamil and Alberto said, but I think what you also want to think about is what are the areas that can help you. There are plenty of nonprofit organizations. Tim, in my bio, you had mentioned Girls Who Code. I encourage everybody to look up Girls Who Code. It's really, really great organization. Go watch the TED Talk from the president of Girls Who Code. She's phenomenal. That is really helpful. I know they have mostly a U.S. presence, but they are expanding out. And so it's great to see these females taking interest in middle school and high school, thinking about information security, more importantly technology. They code for the first time. You make it fun. I think that's very important. Also, to Jamil's point about the job description, you may not realize that you have some gender bias in your job description. Saying things like aggressive or assertive may actually dissuade female candidates from applying to your jobs. But also Jamil's point about like this laundry list, I mean, come on, we got to be a lot more realistic than that, right? We shouldn't think that we need a person that has every single thing to apply for maybe an analyst role or a entry-level role. I mean, don't put CISSP if you're looking for an entry-level role, because clearly you need 4 years, right? So really think about that job description, think about the gender bias that might be there, and then think about other ways that you can incorporate some great organizations like Girls Who Code, Year Up, the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals is another one. Just think about all of the things that you have available to you to start thinking about how to include in your pipeline some diverse candidates.
And just to build on that, because we have people calling in from many different countries where some of these organizations may not be present yet, but that should not prevent you from either creating local chapters or creating organizations that are like it, right? Like, I think this is a topic where we don't need to wait for existing organizations to expand. It's clearly a topic that exists in every country with different flavors. In the US, the discussion around systemic racism right now, but there are many other diversity challenges in other countries. So that would be a call for action for participants on this call. Something I'd like to do at the very end is the three of you represent organizations that are rather large and have significant resources that can be made available, especially if you get the buy-in from the CEO and the board that Jamil mentioned earlier, which unfortunately usually happens only after something bad happened. Last year, Carnegie released a capacity building toolbox with the IMF and SWIFT, FS-ISAC. And it was essentially, SWIFT had approached us and said that SWIFT had updated its customer security program, but they felt like there were a lot of organizations that weren't connected to SWIFT yet, that weren't subject to the customer security program, and that they needed some sort of guidance for basic cyber hygiene. So we put this out last year. There are 6 one-page guides that are based on the NIST framework and existing guidance. They exist in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And one of them is for the board, one of them is for the CEO, 3 are for the CISOs, and that's been very successful. One guide that we currently do not have is on ransomware. And we did get an additional question from the audience of how should companies deal with ransomware? Should they pay it? Should they not pay it? Laura, you had made a comment about having a close relationship with the insurance companies, so you can pick up the phone real quick. But I did want to make sure that we're answering this question, given the increase in, partly because of the cryptocurrency ability to monetize this now. What advice would you give to smaller organizations that are struggling with this, or any organizations right now?
My advice on that one would be 99 out of 100 times, I would not be paying a ransom. I know it looks attractive. Hey, I can just pay, a Bitcoin or 2 or 20 Bitcoin or whatever, and this thing will go away. But it won't go away. It's very unlikely, at least, that it will. And you're supporting these individuals who are just going to continue to exhibit these same types of behaviors around other organizations. And you're no way out of the dark anyway. As soon as you pay it, there's nothing to say that they're actually going to listen to you and not ask for yet another ransom on top of it. And I think that this guidance also is shared by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and many other authorities globally. Now, I say 99 out of 100 because I'm sure that there is a scenario whereby operationally, if all the chips are down, then there's a potential that one would consider doing that. But otherwise, I don't personally agree with it, and I haven't seen it be effective. I want to latch on to one point that Laura was making, and I think her points on diversity were spot on. one of the key things, challenges within security, technology in general, but specifically security, is that we have a dearth of women in this space. And I think some of the comments she was making around the job descriptions and this notion of being aggressive or whatever, they're correct. And the sad reality is that we're in a field that is very lucrative. Like it's always one of the top 3 areas in terms of pay and compensation. But I think from a very early age, we aren't providing the right foundation, and we aren't pushing women into this space. And the sad part about it is that if you look at the studies, almost all of them, and this is coming from, for me, obviously I'm a guy, is that women tend to be better leaders than men. They're more empathetic. They can relate better with individuals. And they tend to generate great deals of performance from the workforce. And I think that it's a sad state of affairs, and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by not putting all that we can into trying to diversify our organizations. And I think it speaks also to trying to find those unicorns. Like, we've got to do our best to be able to attract women into this space, and to be able to develop them if they don't have all of those requisite experiences, because it just makes us perform better as an organization, and it really helps the industry at large.
Thanks, Jamil. That was really sweet. So I think the question about advice on ransomware, is that right, Tim? That it was about ransomware. Yeah. So I agree with Jamil. I wouldn't pay, right? So I think, from a practitioner point of view, all of his points are spot on. The FBI says don't pay. They will come back to you frequently. So I would try not to pay, and then focus more on preparedness. Test those disaster recovery plans, test your continuity. If you have critical assets, make sure you have backups that are offline, not online, because they will be subjected to ransomware too. Make sure you're testing it. Make sure you're just testing how you would respond to it, whether it's talking to your insurers or working through your triaging from an incident response plan perspective. Making sure all the other stakeholders are involved, the lawyers, the public affairs, the CEO. So just making sure you're testing any preparedness on ransomware is my best advice for you.
Sí, desde mi punto de vista coincido también con Laura y Yamil. Yo tampoco pagaría, pero tendremos que tener en cuenta cuatro cosas, ¿no? Cuando nos enfrentamos a esta situación de si pagar o no pagar. Lo primero es que pagar el ransomware, el rescate, puede ser ilegal, dependiendo de la región y las regulaciones locales de cada país. Y puede ser peor el pago que el no hacerlo, porque te puedes enfrentar a una situación penal, ¿no?, por haber pagado un rescate. La segunda es que pagar lo que estás, de cierta medida, es incentivando el negocio del cibercrimen. Es decir, estás haciendo que efectivamente los grupos criminales vayan por esa vía porque se van a lucrar de ello, ¿no? En tercer lugar, es que si pagas una vez, es probable que ya estés en el punto de mira de esas organizaciones y otras y vayan a ir a continuación otra vez contra ti para conseguir infectarte por ransomware, cifrar tu información y volverte a pedir un rescate. Y además, la cuarta es que pagar no significa siempre que vayas a recuperar los datos, ¿no? Y si además esos datos los quieren filtrar a modo de extorsión en Internet, no te garantiza que no vayan a publicarlos. Es decir, hay 4 variables que al menos hay que pensar muy detenidamente a la hora de decidir si se paga o no, porque hacerlo puede ser aún peor, ¿no? Y esa sería mi apreciación. Yo coincido también con Yamil y Laura que lo más importante es ponerse a trabajar para proteger los sistemas y evitar que efectivamente un ransomware nos infecte y secuestre nuestros datos. Tener backups y proteger nuestra organización. Es lo mejor que podemos hacer.
And with that, thank you for sharing this very practical advice to everybody who is on this call and who may be affected by this or a future incident. I very much enjoyed this conversation and appreciate all 3 of you taking the time for today's panel discussion, and for all of you calling in, not just from the Western Hemisphere, but also from faraway places in Africa and elsewhere. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I'd like to hand it over back to the OAS for the closing remarks from, I believe, Allison and OAS officials. So thank you again.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Well, I would like to first, before we go into the closing of this fifth session of the symposium. I would like to thank you, Tim, for moderating this extremely informative panel, really. And well, a special thanks as well to our panelists, Alberto, Lauren, and Jamil, for joining us today and for sharing your experience with us, because I think it was very beneficial, not only for us, but for the over 400 participants that were with us this morning. Now, I would like to introduce Alison August-Treppel. She's the Executive Secretary of CICTE, the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism of the OAS, and she will be delivering the closing remarks. Alison August-Treppel has served as the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism of the Organization of American States since August 2016, and she is responsible for promoting the OAS counterterrorism agenda throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. In addition to managing the day-to-day operations of the CICTE Secretariat, she leads OAS technical assistance efforts in such areas as cybersecurity, border management, including air, land, and maritime, the prevention of terrorism finance, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, among other topics. A native of the United States, Mrs. Treppel has over 25 years of experience working within the Inter-American system, the last 12 of which have focused on multidimensional security issues. As Section Chief and later Deputy Director of the OAS Department of Public Security from 2006 to 2016, she supported efforts to prevent and combat threats to citizen security, including firearms, trafficking, human trafficking, and other manifestations of transnational organized crime. She has also served as political liaison to multiple OAS security-related bodies, including the Committee on Hemispheric Security. Mrs. Treppel holds a BA degree in International Relations and Spanish from Dickinson College. Alison, the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, Mariana. Muy buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos y a todas. En nombre de la Secretaría General de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, de la Secretaría de Seguridad Multidimensional y de la Secretaría del Comité Interamericano contra el Terrorismo, tengo el honor de darle cierre a esta quinta edición del Simposio de Ciberseguridad, la cual fue organizada por el Programa de Ciberseguridad de CICTE con el apoyo de múltiples colaboradores y donantes. Quisiera agradecer en primer lugar a Laura Diener, Jamil Farsi, Alberto Hernández y Tim Maurer por compartir su experiencia y conocimiento a través del excelente panel que acabamos de presenciar. Realmente fueron contribuciones muy interesantes y relevantes, y creo que todos coincidimos en que sus reflexiones son fundamentales para seguir promoviendo la concientización sobre la importancia de la ciberseguridad para el público en general. Muchas gracias a todos. Bueno, si bien somos los promotores y auspiciantes del uso de los TIC, les confieso que al principio del año 2020 jamás imaginábamos que íbamos a tener que convertir este simposio en un evento completamente virtual. Sin embargo, espero que todos coinciden conmigo que no solo hemos logrado, sino hemos superado nuestras expectativas. Han sido 2 semanas intensas, pero supremamente interesantes, y me atrevería a decir que hemos podido atraer una audiencia aún más extensa y más diversa en cuanto a su participación geográfica que en años anteriores. Durante la inauguración del simposio la semana pasada, contamos con más de 1000 participantes que escucharon a nuestros ponentes discutir la importancia de la ciberseguridad y las buenas prácticas en esta industria bajo el contexto de la pandemia actual. De igual manera, en cada uno de nuestros talleres técnicos, más de 600 personas aprendieron sobre diversos temas, como la operación de equipos de respuesta a incidentes de ciberseguridad, los CERTs, estrategias de ciberseguridad, análisis forense digital e investigaciones en ciberseguridad. Sabemos que las amenazas cibernéticas no son estáticas, sino evolucionan continuamente a medida que se desarrollan e implementan nuevas tecnologías a nivel global. Esta naturaleza dinámica demuestra la necesidad de tener las herramientas necesarias y el conocimiento para poder enfrentar los grandes retos de la ciberseguridad. Y como acabamos de escuchar en el último panel, uno de los retos más importantes es la falta de talento humano en esta industria. gracias al informe que publicamos con Amazon Web Services sobre ciberseguridad en educación, sabemos que en la región de América Latina y el Caribe, la brecha de la fuerza laboral en ciberseguridad actualmente es de aproximadamente 600,000 personas. Esta alta cifra refleja la importancia de no solo fortalecer las capacidades de los profesionales actualmente trabajando en este ámbito, sino también motivar a los jóvenes de nuestra región, particularmente a las mujeres, a que busquen carreras en ciberseguridad y ayudarnos a cerrar esta brecha. Teniendo en cuenta que octubre es el mes de concientización en ciberseguridad, también tenemos que seguir informando al público en general sobre los riesgos que existen en el espacio digital y cómo enfrentarlos. La pandemia de COVID-19 ha incrementado el uso y dependencia de las plataformas digitales para el teletrabajo y la teleeducación, así como para hacer actividades cotidianas como compras de comida y transacciones financieras, entre otras. A través de campañas de concientización dirigidas a distintas audiencias, tenemos que promover medidas para asegurar que cada ciudadano y cada ciudadana está contribuyendo a y beneficiando de un ciberespacio seguro. Como algunos ya saben, en julio de este año presentamos conjuntamente con el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo el informe Ciberseguridad, Riesgos, Avances y el Camino a Seguir en América Latina y el Caribe. Este informe demuestra, entre muchos otros aspectos, que los ataques cibernéticos han aumentado significativamente en nuestra región en los últimos 4 años, especialmente aquellos dirigidos a instituciones financieras. Sin embargo, a pesar del creciente interés por la ciberseguridad y el compromiso por fortalecer las capacidades en esta industria, la región se encuentra aún en un nivel de madurez muy básica. En una escala de 1 a 5, donde 1 significa una etapa inicial y 5 significa un estado de madurez avanzado, nuestra región se encuentra en un promedio entre 1 y 2. Espero que todos tengan la oportunidad de conocer los diversos resultados del informe, pero les puedo anticipar que si bien la mayoría de los países de la región han logrado avances importantes, todavía es necesario incrementar nuestros esfuerzos. Es por esta razón que actividades de capacitación como este simposio de ciberseguridad son tan importantes. Nos alegra mucho que ustedes hayan podido beneficiar de la experticia, del conocimiento y de las lecciones aprendidas de los más de 15 expertos que nos han acompañado en estas 2 semanas. Todos reconocidos y altamente valorados por sus contribuciones en materia de ciberseguridad. Nuestro sincero agradecimiento a todos ellos por haber compartido su tiempo con nosotros. También agradezco a todos los donantes que hicieron posible este evento, particularmente el gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Y, por supuesto, a mi equipo estrella del programa de ciberseguridad por su dedicación y compromiso siempre, pero particularmente para asegurar el éxito de este evento. Y finalmente, muchas gracias a todos ustedes, los participantes, por su interés y por su compromiso con este tema. Esperamos que hayan disfrutado de esta 5ª edición del simposio, que hayan aprendido y que, sobre todo, sean multiplicadores de ese conocimiento en sus instituciones y países para que América Latina y el Caribe pueda seguir consolidando y fortaleciendo sus capacidades en ciberseguridad y para que juntos podamos seguir enfrentando los riesgos en el ciberespacio. Muchísimas gracias, feliz viernes y que todos tengan un excelente fin de semana.
Thank you very much, Allison, for your remarks. And we would like to also thank all of our speakers for joining us and sharing your experiences with us this morning. It was very, very beneficial for everyone. And as we close this 5th edition of the Cybersecurity Symposium, I would also like to thank the participants who have joined us throughout this 2 weeks. As Alison mentioned, we had over 1,000 participants in the opening session and about between 400 and 500 participants throughout the tracks and today as well. So we would like to thank you. And well, we hope you learned something new. And we would also encourage you to be multipliers of this knowledge, not only in your institutions and countries, but also in our region. And as we work to make cyberspace more accessible and secure for everyone. We'd like to thank you once again and encourage you also to follow us on Twitter at OEA_cyber, so you can learn more about the activities that we'll be conducting this month for the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And also to check out the videos in case you missed anything from the opening sessions of the symposium. We will be posting the videos there as well. So thank you very much for joining us and have a great Friday as well.